Hi everyone, as promised, today's video is all about disruptive innovation and its importance in terms of investing, so how you should invest, and economics. And we'll also be looking at its importance in terms of how it could become part of people's everyday lives and how it could affect many industries, or perhaps all industries. One example of a disruptive innovation like this was the internet, and that did affect many industries and change people's everyday lives and how they went about their everyday lives in terms of many things becoming online, whereas before they used to be person to person. So we'll be looking at examples of recent disruptive innovations like those. The internet is quite a recent disruptive innovation, maybe only 20 years old. So we will be looking at some recent disruptive innovations, perhaps maybe 20 to 30 years old, like the internet. And we'll also be looking at some future disruptive innovations, such as CRISPR and blockchain, and we'll be briefly outlining what they are and their importance and the impacts they could have on investing and economics. And briefly, we'll talk about how they could change everyday lives and certain industries, which is in fact how they are important for investors, because investors are investing in many companies across many industries. And we'll also be looking at the definitions of disruptive innovation and disruptive technology, so what they exactly are, and we'll be looking at the differences between them, and we'll be covering the definitions for disruption, disruptive technology, and disruptive innovation, and as I said, the differences between them. And by learning this, we can then tell what exactly counts as a disruptive innovation or a disruptive technology, and what actually doesn't, and what is sometimes confused for being a disruptive innovation or mistaken for being a disruptive innovation, but actually isn't. First, we need a definition for disruptive innovation. And a disruptive innovation is a technology whose application significantly affects the way industries or an industry or a market works and runs. It could force companies to change the way they go about their businesses. So perhaps with the invention of the internet, it would force people to go online, or businesses to go online and make their services online, which it did force businesses to do. And those businesses that were unable to do it or did not want to do it ended up failing, because that was inevitable, since all the competing businesses were then offering better services, because whichever businesses did not have some services online, they would be inferior to the businesses that did, so they will not succeed. And the definition for disruptive technology, which may be a term you've also heard before but might not know the difference between them, it's essentially the same thing. So a disruptive innovation is still a technology that disrupts the way an industry works, which is significantly affects a market or an industry or industries. And we'll also be looking at exactly what disrupting means and the process of disruption. And an example of disruptive technology is smartphones. And smartphones did change many people's lives and the industry of technology, because many people want to now buy smartphones, and then companies like Apple and Samsung are producing a lot of smartphones just to compete for consumers' wants, because consumers are always looking to buy smartphones, and they're almost essential now. How many of you don't have a phone? You might be watching this on a phone right now, so that just shows you how many people use smartphones and how big a thing it's become. So it does significantly change industries, and also companies who are competing in technology, and perhaps they're selling older phones which don't have the camera, aren't smartphones. If they don't use any smartphones, or if they don't end up selling smartphones, then that company will inevitably end up failing, like we looked at for disruptive innovation. So hence, the very slight difference between those two things, even though I said they're essentially the same thing, is that the disruptive innovation refers to the application of the technology, such as the internet. The internet alone won't do anything, but using the internet for businesses, using the internet to do certain things like create websites, etc., has the big impact of disrupting industries. And for disruptive technologies, it's just the technology itself. So the technology of the smartphone is what was the disruptor in this case, not using the smartphone to to do something else with the smartphone. The smartphone is the thing that was the disruptor, not its application for the use of something else. And hence, disruption is the process where new technologies or new products that are made available disrupt their predecessors and overthrow their predecessors in the sense that they start as a smaller business and then they grow and overtake their predecessors and invalidate their predecessors, which then also, this is whilst they're creating their own new enterprises. So they're invalidating their predecessors and creating their own enterprise, so they become the more successful company. And the definition of disruption I've just given you is roughly the definition taken from Investopedia, which is an investing site that gives many good definitions for investing and economics. So you can check that out as well if you're ever looking for a good definition. So there are two ways in which something can qualify as a disruptive innovation. The first way is by catching on to low-end consumers of the market. So by catching on meaning essentially just appealing to those consumers, so the low-end consumers. And then the other way is by appealing to previously non-consumers and making them new consumers. So they weren't going to buy this product before, but now they're going to actually buy this product. Or innovation, as I should say. So we'll first focus on the first one. So what I mean by this is, for example, what companies tend to do if this is time and this is price. And by price, I mean so for example, this could be targeting the high end, the higher price. This could be targeting the low end of the market. So they would start here. They would start by targeting low-end mainstream people, and as they become more and more popular, they move up to the more luxury brands, and often this is the case. And say this is mainstream, this is high-end, and they continue and they go to high-end, or they attract this range of consumers, let's say. But then this is the low end, and what you end up, or they can attract this range because now they're producing this range rather than this range which they were before. And before they were attracting both low-end consumers and high-end consumers. This is kind of vague, so I'll write low, main, high. It's not very clear, but now it should be more clear. And these are the consumers that they're attracting, so high and mainstream consumers. And what ended up happening is that the low-end consumers get left out. And when you leave out the low-end consumers, then that gives the opportunity for another company to take your place by first, so look, this is a company. I'm just going to redraw this graph, so give me 2 seconds. So this is the high end, this is the middle mainstream consumers, and these are low. And this is the prices that they charge because of the range of the range that they produce and the end of the market that they work with. And when they start neglecting this lower part, so after a while when they become more famous, when they neglect the lower consumers, then it gives an opportunity for a less established company. I'll do this in another color. So a new company comes in and they offer the services to the lower consumers, and then they take this market share, and then they move up to the mainstream while still addressing the lower consumers. And then they could as well, they could follow the same path perhaps, and they could move up to the high end, but if they're offering better service, or perhaps they're just the new trend or something because they're a more recently made company, and they end up decreasing this company's market share. So say before the main company had 50% of the market share and the new company had 0%, now the main company may, or like the previously made company may only or 10% of the market, and this new company owns 70%. It's taken over some of the less well-known companies and the smaller companies. So then it ends up taking some of the market share by starting at a low-end foothold of the market, and that's how some companies grow. This counts as a disruptive innovation because it is disrupting this industry. So we've looked at low-end consumers. Now we're going to look at non-consumers becoming new consumers, and this is definitely the main uses of disruptive innovation, when people talk about usage of disruptive innovation, when people talk about the internet, when people talk about AI, when people talk about CRISPR, when people talk about renewable energy, and I'm just listing many things here. I think people also say, and I think this in fact does count as, this Netflix does in fact count as a disruptive innovation, but this is in terms of the low end foothold of the market where we looked at, so this doesn't count as a non-consumer to new consumer disruptive innovation. But all these things, they didn't exist before they existed. For example, some people would say that Netflix movie selling still exists, and the Netflix went first from the lower consumers and only offering certain services, then went to the quality that it is now, offering high quality services and at any time and for free. Or not the Netflix, you have to pay for Netflix, but each movie individually is free and you don't have to pay for each movie. And then that is a low end example. As I was saying, these are all non-consumers to new consumers examples of disruptive innovation. I remember now. So what I was saying is, unlike Netflix, who started at the low end of the market, and films did exist before, film selling existed before, there was no internet that existed before the invention of the internet. There's no AI that existed till people discovered that they could do something with AI, and strong AI and weak AI, and they could develop artificial intelligence. No CRISPR gene editing existed before they discovered that they could apply this technology that previously they had found in bacteria, but they didn't know they could apply it into humans. And also renewable energy, they didn't know they could harness renewable energy from the sun and the wind until they knew they could do this. So there's no alternative or inferior product that existed before this. These are all making non-consumers, so people before these were non-consumers, they didn't buy these products, making them into consumers by creating a whole new market of its own. So creates a new market, creates new consumers, I'll say. So these people were not going to buy any, for example, smartphones is another example. They weren't going to buy smartphones because smartphones didn't exist. But then they turned non-consumers of smartphones, so made the non-consumers of smartphones consumers of smartphones, because it appealed to these people and created a whole new market for smartphones. So this is the main usage when people talk about disruption, and disruption, which is like when they talk about it being very grand and it's in fact just taking over the market. It is very important because it is creating a whole new market of its own by making non-consumers consumers. And I've said that point many times, but it is quite important. What have we covered so far? So we have covered the definitions and we've gone through them, and hence we know what counts as disruptive innovation and what doesn't. Just to give an example of what doesn't, something like Uber, where taxis existed before it and it wasn't going for the low end of the taxi spectrum, you could say. It was going for the high end of the market, or at least the mainstream people. And since taxis already existed and it wasn't targeting the low end of the market, then it does not count as a disruptive innovation, even though it did majorly change the taxi industry, since a privatized company does a lot of runs a lot of the taxis. We've also gone through the examples of some recent disruptive innovations and some possible future ones. But what we haven't covered as much is the importance of disruptive innovation, which we are going to do now, and the economic implications of disruptive innovation. So 2 to 3 more billion people could be with access to the internet by 2025, and there's already 3.2 billion people using the internet or with access to the internet today. So that is essentially 5.2 to 6.2 billion people, which is the majority of the world, have the potential to have access to the internet by 2025, which is just the impact that a disruptive innovation can have, such as the internet. So this just shows you what disruptive innovation can do. And around 1.3 million road deaths occur each year. This is just deaths on the road. And the majority of these could be solved by autonomous cars that drive themselves, cars that are essentially self-aware. And this is one example of a future disruptive innovation. So that's one to look out for. Another thing that disruptive innovations can do, and we're going to look at, these are the implications that they could have. They could add to the GDP, since many more businesses are focusing on these new innovations, and they could create many more jobs in these new industries, but also they could cause many jobs to be lost and many capital investments to be lost, such as investments for labor meaning just a workforce, then the standard workforce of just administration or perhaps some plumbers or builders. AI could take over these jobs, and AI is an example of a disruptive innovation. So this just shows you the importance of disruptive innovation and what it can do. And these are, I'm being really honest with you, these are a very small amount. There are many more statistics that could support how big a thing disruptive innovation can be, such as the internet. The internet was nothing a while ago, now it's everything. So we can look at another example, which is what I'll be talking a lot about in the upcoming videos, and that's CRISPR. So you really want to know about CRISPR, because what CRISPR essentially is a gene editing technique. And you've heard of designer babies, test tube babies, and gene editing to alter diseases. So I'll be talking a lot about that and its implications, the main companies that are focusing on CRISPR and developing that technology, and its potential and what it can achieve, but also the risks that it holds when it comes to investing, and why it's risky to invest in it, but if your investment is right, it could really pay off. So yeah, that is the importance of investments in disruptive innovation, and that's what I'll be focusing on over the next few videos, or even more than that, maybe over the next 5 to 10 videos. If you like this channel, please like and share this channel, and also subscribe if you really like it, and also watch my other channel, which is called Mathematics, which has some difficult math problems if you enjoy that sort of stuff. But most importantly, well, as well as subscribing and sharing, most importantly, watch my CRISPR videos. They're really interesting, and you really need to know about CRISPR. It's something that over the course of the next year or so, everyone will know about.